I was going to go through some of the observations I had as a first time attendee at this convention, through my eyes, what I saw as a first timer. First off, it was huge. It was massive. I knew it was going to be massive, but nothing compared to what I thought it could be. It was just huge, and in a good way. There was a huge crowds, even bigger apparently on the weekend, but it was huge. There were people everywhere, kids, older people, middle-aged, young, everything you could think of was there. And they were all enjoying the hobby, which was the coolest part. Some observations I noticed. Football and basketball are hot. Those were what I saw, probably 75-25 football, basketball compared to baseball. And I'm a baseball guy, so I know this. I had to go look for baseball in a sense that the display cases be lined up. Baseball would have the back two, whereas football and basketball would have the first 8 cases. And a lot of that was modern, and it was drawing the young kids, and I love that. That was what I perceived as just you know, a huge growth in that area. I'm not particularly into basketball, a little football, not as much as I used to be a few years ago. But that was the the hot ticket there. So that's what I noticed. Secondly, vintage baseball is strong. There was a lot of vintage. You could actually go and see the vintage. The other ones, it was kind of tough. You had to take your turn. They were sometimes in the afternoons, you had tables 2 and 3 deep, and not just one table or 2 tables, most of the tables at the National. But vintage, you could get a good look at and you could enjoy and appreciate. And while I was looking for a certain card, or a couple certain cards, I still was able to go through and just stop and appreciate. And, I hated to use the same line with the dealers when they said, "Hey, anything you looking for?" And I was, but not at that particular time. And I would say, "No, no, no, I'm just admiring your collection. I'm just looking." And they go, "Well, thank you. I appreciate that." And I would just keep looking, because a lot of the prices were out of my price range, but still the history of the hobby right there, looking at those cards from the 50s, 60s, teens, 20s, 1920, and just, it was amazing. So vintage was strong this year, which was really cool. I think the prices were a little high. I did find deals. You have to look. I'm particular. I looked and I found some deals, but I think overall, comparatively to what I saw, the prices were big. But, it didn't hinder from my experience with it. I still enjoyed being there at that card show. The dealer communication and dealer reception to buyers. I saw people talking and trading stories and talking about cards, and it was great. I mean, I saw there was a connection, and I made a connection with a lot of dealers discussing other things than cards, talking about life, talking about a t-shirt I had on about a show I like. I mean, it was all over the board, but it meant people were communicating. They weren't just sitting behind their tables, and I shouldn't say kids and adults were not just looking down at the cards and not talking. And I love to see that. There was a lot of that. And that made it very, very personal, I think, in some ways, because you want to go there and you want to share a story. You want to discuss things, and that's what you could do. So that's one thing I really enjoyed about the National. I mean, they had a whole area set up for breakers. It was crazy. It was like MTV on steroids, if you come from the MTV era. I mean, it brought the excitement level up, and we need that for the young kids. The young population there was strong. And I would venture to say a lot of older people, older collectors were like, do we need the rock and roll environment? And we needed that for those kids and that younger generation, whether we want it or not, whether you believe in the breakers or not, that's your decision. But it brought a party atmosphere. And you know what? It kept the kids' attention, because those kids are going to be the future of the hobby to come. So it keeps them involved. It wasn't my cup of tea. I walked through a few times and just kept on walking, but I smiled and I knew it was for other people. Just like vintage cards are mostly for the older adults, should the kids be complaining that there's a lot of vintage cards there? No, it's to each his own in the hobby. And that's how it should be. There should be no right or wrong what should be there. So that's what I saw in that. Now, I'll preface this by saying I am a newbie. However, there were some things I think that needed to be addressed perhaps for next year. And this could be on the dealer level, not the national level or the national level. One was buying cards. I am all for it. I think it's wonderful. I think it's great. I'm glad that dealers are buying and there's people buying. And there were some dealers that had designated areas where you could bring your cards and sell your cards. And that was great. I appreciated that. However, a lot of the dealers were doing their buying right over on top of the cases, and it kind of obscured it to see anything. And, this may be old man complaining. I don't know, but I just wish that most dealers would have a designated area. And I realize they don't have a lot of table space. I get it. But it might be better to push it off to a corner or something, just because there were times I couldn't see anything because they were right on top of the cards. And I moved on, and that's fine. That's what I did. I'm just saying that's what I noticed as a first timer, that, a lot of the buying cards, because there were a lot of people selling and there were a lot of dealers buying. It wasn't just a one off, it was quite a bit. It happened. So maybe, finding a spot to do, their buying and they're negotiating to the side where you're not blocking your cards because you are moving away from potential other buyers. But, that was just that was just from what I saw. Secondly, and I hope this could be the national end, is they need to provide more seating. There was nowhere to sit, I guess, unless you had VIP for certain corporate areas like upper deck, tops, etc. There was literally nowhere to sit. You had to sit against the wall or find a corner and sit. And that's what I did. And that's how I, had taken a rest, or I wanted to read up on some cards I was looking at to get some better prices. But they just didn't have any seating, just for lounging, just for taking a break. And I was warned of that. I knew that by reading stuff, but it may be something they need to address and look at. That, and I know they can't accommodate everybody. They can put 300 tables up or 300 chairs and they'll still get complaints, but at least they tried. There was just nothing. Another thing I noticed too was a lot of card places didn't have prices on their cards. And I realized they have a ton of cards. So I don't know how this can be solved. It's just irritating because you don't have an idea and you ask, and everybody pulls up the eBay app or Card Ladder or something like that to look, which I guess that's okay. It just bugged me a few times. That's not a huge complaint, obviously. That can't be something that just caught my eye a few times because it was irritating when there's no price on there. And I appreciated the dealers that did take time to price their cards. And a lot of the deals I found had prices on them, and they were fairly priced. A lot of them, I saw would take eBay and subtract eBay fees and then use that price, which I thought was great. But, that's not a huge deal breaker. It was just something I noticed. Fourth was the new area on the second floor. And I think this is getting hit on by a lot of trading card vloggers. It was a mess. And I assume that will be fixed next year. Everybody, the dealers upstairs, I hope they complain because they were squashed in there. They had no room. Nobody had any room to move. It was just a big mess. There were a lot of corporate things. The crowd was crazy. It was big. It was loud, but it was good. I mean, you had your corporate sponsorships there. Heritage, Gary V was there. Tops, CGC, SGC, Panini, Upper Deck, all of the corporate sponsorship was there. And, we might complain that it was a corporate event, but, I guess you need that corporate sponsorship sometime to pay some of the bills. So you knew they were there and they had a large presence there. But I tell you what made it was the dealers. There was so many dealers and they were wonderful to work with for the most part. They really were. They were good people. And just having like-minded people who enjoy the hobby where nothing else, it's a time to come and just not worry about work, the world, the economics, the economy, anything like that. You just say, hey, for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, I'm just going to enjoy sports cards. And that's what everybody did.